Yes.
My husband, he has a service-connected disability, and he wants to be buried at sea. We're from California. Is that something that you can do here in the state of Florida? And on top of that, I would like to have a place to go, you know, to remember him by.
Right.
Is it possible to do a burial at sea and have a plot in a veteran's cemetery?
Okay.
Nothing there.
All right. A plot. All right. First,
Well,
let me.
this is Tombstone too.
Okay. Let me just back up on a burial in a cemetery. It's also not just for the veteran. It's for the veteran's spouse or husband as well. And so if the veteran is a man and the wife predeceases, she can be buried in the cemetery, and they will hold the space next to hers for him, or vice versa. You talk about burial at sea. If you're talking about casket,
No, just you know, he just wants
no problem. Casketed remains can be done, but there's a whole there's a regulation to that, and the government would have to walk us through it. Cremated remains, no problem. Now, could you be memorialized at a veteran cemetery or any other cemetery? Yes, you can put a remembrance plaque. You can purchase a spot and have a memory plaque. You can also have us separate a portion of the ashes if you want, and that can be interred in any cemetery, and that can be memorialized. They're not going to say we need all of the cremated remains. You can do a portion, okay?
This lady here had a question.
I have a couple of questions in my head right now. What's
Okay.
the average cremation versus burial? Especially in Florida, since it's about...
Okay. If our fee for cremation,
No, not the fee, just the percentage of people.
oh,
Percentage of...
here in Southwest Florida, it is approaching about
I
80%.
would think so.
About 80%.
Okay, now we can go to the
Okay.
fee. Take a scenario of living here,
Right?
having a church here
Right?
with a columbarium.
Right?
How much would it be to do this whole thing?
If
A
you,
burial here, say they die in the nursing home or the
Okay.
hospital here, take us from that through to the church.
okay. Okay. In that scenario, okay, and if you want us involved at the memorial service at a church, okay, if we're involved, the price goes from $970 to $1,515. Why the difference? Why the difference? Because either myself and Glenn are both going to be there in the church to set up a table with pictures, a guest book, prayer cards if it's a Catholic church, and we're going to be there during the Mass. Do we have to be there? No. You can say, no, I'll do that by myself. My church has a parish nurse. We have women in the church that'll take care of that with us. What are you going to charge us for that? The answer to that is $970. Okay? Placement into the columbarium, if it's a church, they're probably going to want the cremated remains placed in an urn that they have that will fit in that columbarium. They're going to charge you for that columbarium space, but it's a fraction of the cost that you would pay at a cemetery.
Oh, yeah, because we've already...
Fraction of the cost.
Well, what about scattering the ashes in the garden around the columbarium?
All right. If the cemetery has, some of the Catholic cemeteries have a spot in the ground where you can place the cremated remains in a grave, in a small urn, that they provide or we provide. Again, you do whatever is cost effective to you. The church doesn't mind and we don't mind. You can arrange for the opening and closing of that spot, go to the cemetery, the priest will bless, you'll inter the ashes, it'll be closed, and that's it. Scattering gardens. Scattering gardens. Many churches have scattering gardens. They will scatter the cremated remains or normally put them in an area And the whole area is a scattering for most members of the church. So it's not a designated spot for you. And scattering areas in a church cannot be memorialized in that spot. They can, however, a lot of times have a memorial plaque on a wall or a tablet to one side.
Yeah, my parents have that.
Okay.
They have a beautiful home. What was the other question? I had something else. I'll think, wait a minute. Get somebody else. to
Okay,
answer.
yes, ma'am.
The small urn that you keep referring to it, that a church might have, does not contain all of the ashes.
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, they do.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We place cremated remains into a heavy plastic bag. And then we take that bag, it's sealed with a tie, not a twist tie, but a tie that locks. You can't get it open unless you cut it. And attached to that is a stainless steel wafer that has our name and a number on it. And that number corresponds with all of the other records that followed that person through the cremation process, okay? Placed into a temporary black plastic urn, all right? It's pretty rigid. And then we place that in a white cardboard box, and both of those are labeled with our name, the deceased name, the date of death, and the date of cremation, and we supply a cremation certificate for burial. According to our interpretation, that temporary urn could be interred. Could be interred. If they say you have to buy an urn from them, that should say, why? Why do I have to do that? And see what their answer is. And if they say, because we have them to sell, it's not a good answer. Yes, ma'am.
What if you've already pre-planned, you made your pre-plan, and you already have a plot?
Right.
Do you, if the person passes way down here, can you make arrangements with both of you to do the embalming, or is that done at the hospital
No.
and then shipped?
We have our own embalming room at our facility, okay? It's a state-of-the-art embalming room, okay? If anybody wants to view that room and say, okay, this looks like an operating room. This looks like an operating room. You do that. We do that when somebody wants to, for example, is coming down here on vacation, or 6 months, is snowbirds. Somebody passes, but they have their arrangements in Connecticut. So we contact that funeral home. We tell that funeral home our charges for removal, for the embalming, for the airfare, roughly about $450 for airfare to $500. We place the person into what we call a shipping container, all right, and transfer that to the receiving funeral director, all right? If there's no funeral director on the other end, then we sit down with you, go through the same process. We go through all of our charges for shipping you to that funeral home. And we also say, if you want to have a casket, let's look at our charges for caskets, and let's call the funeral home up there that you'd like us to use, and while you're in the room, let's ask them for their charges. And let's see what is cost effective for you. We're about 50% less than a traditional funeral home. Okay? Yes, ma'am. And then back.
Do you have family or designees that you are planning to have carry on your business in years to come?
Well, interesting. Interesting.
My kids are
Okay? I mean, you may be sitting here saying, hey, you know, Glenn.
Did my children pay to say that?
All right. It's a great question. You're going to say, Glenn is a little bit long a tooth, and Michael is right in back of him. He's probably being outfitted for a walker as we speak. All right? What happens? I have 4 daughters. 4 daughters. 2 of which are married to funeral directors. One in Boston, one in Martha's Vineyard. Guess what? They know what Dad and Glenn are putting together down here in the concept. And something happens to the two of us, they're going to be here quick smart. All right? Now, Glenn has a son-in-law that's in the business. He's going to have to work with my son-in-laws for his portion of the business. So is it going to carry on? Absolutely. Absolutely. We hope it will.